used a Ouija board and summoned a demon.
As Karen walked through the antiquities shop, her eyes were drawn to an elaborate display in the far corner. The shelves were lined with ancient artifacts, each more mysterious and sinister than the last. But it was the Ouija board on the center shelf that captured her attention. Unlike any she had seen before, this board was crafted from a pale, bone-like material. Intricate carvings of arcane symbols adorned its surface, and the planchette seemed to glint menacingly under the flickering light of an overhead chandelier. As Karen reached out to touch it, a chill ran down her spine. "Careful with that," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see the shop's salesman, a gaunt man with sharp features and piercing eyes, watching her intently. "That's not a toy." "I'm not afraid," Karen replied, her curiosity piqued. "What's so special about this one?" The salesman stepped closer, his expression serious. "That board is made from human bones," he said, his voice low and grave. "It was crafted by an ancient cult, using the remains of a powerful sorcerer executed for necromancy. They believed the sorcerer's spirit could be bound within the board, granting it immense power." Karen felt a thrill of both excitement and apprehension. Why would someone make such a thing? To harness the sorcerer's power, or to control his spirit, the salesman explained. But it's dangerous. The spirit within is malevolent, and those who use the board risk unleashing his wrath. Despite the ominous warning, Karen couldn't resist the allure of the board. She had always been fascinated by the occult, and this seemed like the ultimate find. She picked it up, feeling the cold, smooth surface under her fingers. "I'll take it," she said, ignoring the nagging doubt in the back of her mind. The salesman sighed, a mixture of resignation and concern in his eyes. "Be careful. Follow the instructions precisely, and never, ever use it alone." Karen nodded, though her thoughts were already racing ahead to the possibilities. As she paid for the board and left the shop, the salesman's final words echoed in her ears. "Some things are better left undisturbed." That night, as she set the Ouija board on her dining table, all she could think about was why someone would bother to create one using human bones. She would later regret not learning why. The evening air was thick with anticipation as Karen and her best friend Lily settled into the cozy confines of Karen's living room. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the room, and a circle of candles flickered softly, adding to the eerie ambience. The Ouija board lay in the center of the coffee table, its bone-white surface gleaming in the candlelight. "I can't believe you actually bought that thing," Lily said, eyeing the board warily. "You know these things are just for fun, right? They don't actually work." Karen smirked, a mix of excitement and defiance in her eyes. "We'll see about that. Besides, it's not just any Ouija board. The guy at the shop said it was made from human bones and has some powerful spirit trapped inside." Lily rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her curiosity. "All right, let's get this over with. What do we do?" Karen consulted the old yellowed instruction booklet that came with the board. "First, we place our fingers lightly on the planchette. Then we ask a question and let the spirit guide our hands." They positioned themselves around the table, each placing 2 fingers on the planchette. The atmosphere grew tense as Karen took a deep breath. "Is there a spirit here who wishes to communicate with us?" For a few moments, nothing happened. The planchette remained still, and the only sound was the crackling of the candles. Then slowly, the planchette began to move. Karen and Lily exchanged wide-eyed glances as it glided across the board, spelling out a chilling response. Y-E-S. "Did you move that?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "No, I swear," Karen replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's ask another question." "What is your name?" Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The planchette began to move again, faster this time, as if eager to communicate. It spelled out M-A-L-A-C-H-I. "Malachi," Karen repeated, the name sending a shiver down her spine. "What do you want?" The planchette zipped across the board, spelling out a single word, F-R-E-E. Suddenly, the room grew colder and the candles flickered violently. A gust of icy wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flames and plunging them into darkness. Karen and Lily gasped, their fingers still on the planchette, which now felt ice cold. "This isn't funny, Karen," Lily said, her voice shaking. "I think we should stop." But Karen was transfixed, a mixture of fear and fascination holding her in place. "We need to know more. Malachi, how can we free you?" The planchette moved with a speed and force that made their fingers ache. It spelled out B-L-O-O-D. A sudden, loud crash echoed from the kitchen, making them both jump. Karen's cat, Midnight, hissed and darted out of the room. The candles flared back to life on their own, casting an ominous glow over the room. Karen and Lily stared at each other, realizing they had unleashed something far more sinister than they had anticipated. "We need to end this," Lily said urgently, pulling her hands away from the planchette. Karen hesitated, but eventually nodded, removing her fingers as well. "Goodbye, Malachi," she said, hoping to close the session properly, but the planchette moved on its own, spelling out a final, chilling message. T-O-O-L-A-T-E. The candles went out again, leaving them in pitch darkness. The temperature in the room plummeted, and they could hear faint, sinister whispers surrounding them. Karen fumbled for her phone, using the flashlight to find the switch for the overhead lights. When the lights flickered on, the room was in disarray. Furniture was overturned, books were scattered, and the Ouija board lay on the floor, the planchette still moving slightly. Karen picked up the board, her hands trembling. "We've got to get rid of this thing," she said, her voice filled with fear. Lily nodded, her face pale. "Tomorrow. First thing." As they tried to clean up the mess, the weight of their mistake settled heavily on them. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line that night, a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the whispers from the living room seemed to follow her, a haunting reminder of the spirit they had unwittingly set free. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in Karen's home grew increasingly oppressive. It started with small things, lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own, and cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. Karen tried to brush it off as her imagination, but the unease gnawed at her. One evening, while she was reading in the living room, a framed photo of her family fell from the mantel and shattered on the floor. Startled, Karen picked it up and noticed that the glass was cracked in a way that seemed to spell out the letters M and A. She shivered, recalling the name spelled out on the Ouija board, Malachi. Unable to ignore the growing sense of dread, Karen decided to seek help. She visited Dr. Rains, a local demonologist known for his expertise in the occult. His office, filled with ancient books and strange artifacts, had an air of both mystery and authority. "Tell me everything," Dr. Rains said, his eyes serious and focused. Karen recounted the events of the night she and Lily used the Ouija board, describing the messages, the sudden cold, and the unsettling phenomena that followed. Dr. Rains listened intently, nodding. This is more than a simple haunting. The board you described is an artifact of significant power, especially given its macabre construction. The spirit you contacted, Malachi, was likely a sorcerer in life, and his malevolence has only grown in death. What can I do? Karen asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The spirit seeks freedom, Dr. Rains explained, and it appears willing to use you as a conduit. We need to perform a binding ritual to contain it, but be warned, this will be dangerous. That night, Karen returned home with a list of items needed for the ritual: candles, sword, protective sigils, and a vial of holy water. She called Lily, who reluctantly agreed to help. As they prepared for the ritual, the paranormal activity escalated. Objects flew off shelves, eerie whispers filled the air, and shadows seemed to move on their own. The tension was palpable, and both women were on edge. "We need to hurry," Karen said, lighting the candles and placing them in a circle around the Ouija board. They sat on the floor, salt forming a protective barrier around them. Dr. Rains had instructed them on the steps of the ritual, emphasizing the importance of focus and intent. Karen began to chant the incantation Dr. Rains had provided. The air grew colder, and the candles flickered violently. The room seemed to vibrate with a dark energy. Lily's eyes darted around wide with fear. "Stay focused," Karen urged, though she herself was trembling. The planchette on the Ouija board began to move on its own, spelling out frantic messages: RELEASEME, The board seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a palpable malevolence emanating from it. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the candles were snuffed out by an unseen force. The only light came from the faint glow of the planchette, which now hovered above the board, spinning wildly. Karen's voice wavered, but she continued the incantation, her words growing stronger with each syllable. The air around them crackled with energy, and a low guttural growl echoed through the room. A shadowy figure began to form above the Ouija board, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Malachi's spirit had manifested, and it was furious. The temperature dropped to an unbearable cold, their breath visible in the icy air. "Karen, I'm scared," Lily whispered, clutching Karen's arm. "Keep going," Karen insisted, her voice resolute. "We're almost there." The spirit lunged at them, its form shifting and writhing. Karen threw the holy water at it, and the entity recoiled with a hiss, smoke rising where the water made contact. But it wasn't enough to dispel it. Desperate, Karen picked up the Ouija board and held it aloft. "By the power of this board, I command you, Malachi, to be bound." The board vibrated violently, and a blinding light erupted from it. Malachi's spirit screamed, a sound that reverberated through their very bones. The light grew brighter, enveloping the spirit and pulling it back into the board. The room fell silent. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a heavy stillness. Karen and Lily sat in the aftermath, breathing heavily, their hands still shaking. "Did it work?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Karen looked at the Ouija board, now inert and lifeless. "I think so," she said, but a part of her still felt the lingering presence of Malachi, a dark shadow that had imprinted itself on her very soul. They cleaned up the ritual remnants and secured the Ouija board in a locked chest, determined to keep it sealed away. But the events of that night had left a mark on both women, a sense of foreboding that refused to fade. Karen knew they had only just begun to understand the true depth of the darkness they had unleashed, and the thought haunted her as she lay in bed that night, the whispers of Malachi still echoing in her mind. The following days brought a fragile sense of normalcy to Karen's life, but the tension lingered like a shadow. The Ouija board remained locked in the chest, and Karen made sure to avoid any further interaction with it. Yet, the haunting continued in subtler, more insidious ways. Karen's dreams were plagued by visions of Malachi, his dark form always looming at the edge of her consciousness. One evening, Karen came home to find her apartment in disarray. Drawers were pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. Her cat, Midnight, was hiding under the couch, hissing and terrified. The sight sent a chill down her spine. "Lily," Karen called, hoping her friend had stopped by, though she knew it was unlikely. She cautiously stepped further into the apartment, her heart pounding. She found her bedroom door slightly ajar, and as she pushed it open, she saw it. The chest that held the Ouija board was wide open, its contents empty. "No," Karen whispered, a wave of dread washing over her. "This can't be happening." In the center of her bed lay the Ouija board, the planchette placed neatly on top. It was as if Malachi was mocking her, taunting her for thinking she could contain him. Panic gripped her, and she immediately called Dr. Rains. "I told you to keep it secure," Dr. Rains said, his voice a mix of frustration and concern. "This is bad, Karen, very bad." "I did. I locked it away," Karen argued, but her voice was tinged with desperation. "What do I do now?" "Come to my office. Bring the board," Dr. Rains instructed. "We need to take more drastic measures." Karen carefully wrapped the Ouija board in a cloth and placed it in a sturdy box, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that it was pulsing with a dark energy. She drove to Dr. Rains's office, her mind racing with fear and anxiety. Dr. Rains met her at the door, his expression grave. He led her to a back room filled with arcane symbols and protective charms. "We'll perform a more powerful binding ritual here. But you must understand, Karen. The spirit of Malachi is cunning and strong. This will be dangerous." Karen nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes. I can't live like this anymore." They began the preparations, setting up a circle of protective runes and lighting candles infused with sacred herbs. Dr. Rains handed Karen a small vial of her own blood, collected from a previous visit. "This is your blood. It's a part of the ritual," he explained. "Malachi seeks freedom through blood, but we'll use yours to bind him instead." Karen shivered at the thought, but understood the necessity. They placed the Ouija board in the center of the circle and began the incantation. The air grew thick with tension, and the room seemed to darken despite the candlelight. As they chanted, the planchette started to move, spelling out frantic messages: HELPMEKILLTHEM. Malachi's spirit grew more aggressive, the room vibrating with his fury. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing several candles. The shadows on the walls seemed to come to life, twisting and writhing. Karen could feel Malachi's presence, his rage palpable. "Stay strong, Karen," Dr. Rains shouted over the howling wind. "We're almost there." Karen poured the vial of her blood onto the Ouija board, the liquid seeping into the bone-white surface. The board seemed to absorb it, glowing with an eerie red light. Malachi's form began to manifest, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes, hovering above the board. "I command you, Malachi, by the power of this blood and these sacred rites, to be bound forever," Dr. Rains intoned, his voice echoing with authority. Malachi screamed, a sound that resonated deep within Karen's soul. The figure writhed and contorted, fighting against the binding spell. The glow intensified, and Karen felt a searing pain in her chest, as if a part of her was being ripped away. With a final, agonizing shriek, Malachi's form was pulled back into the Ouija board. The red glow faded, and the room fell silent. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by an almost eerie calm. Karen collapsed to the floor, exhausted and trembling. Dr. Rains quickly secured the Ouija board in a lead-lined box, inscribing it with protective runes. "It's done," he said, helping Karen to her feet. "Malachi is bound, but you must remain vigilant. His influence won't disappear overnight." Karen nodded, her body aching and her spirit weary. She knew this was only a temporary respite, but for now, she could breathe a little easier. As she left Dr. Rains's office, the weight of her ordeal pressed heavily on her, a constant reminder of the darkness she had encountered and the lingering presence of Malachi, still lurking in the shadows of her mind. Weeks passed, and while the intense paranormal activity had subsided, Karen couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her dreams remained haunted by Malachi, and strange occurrences continued to plague her daily life. Objects would occasionally move on their own, and she often awoke to find cryptic messages scrawled in condensation on her bathroom mirror. FREEMELETMEOUT. One night, Karen was jolted awake by a loud crash. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and listened intently. The noise had come from the living room. She grabbed her phone and crept down the hallway, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. As she approached the living room, she saw the lead-lined box containing the Ouija board lying open on the floor. The protective runes had been scratched off, and the board was missing. Panic surged through her. "No," she whispered, dread tightening her chest. She heard a low, guttural growl behind her. Whirling around, she came face to face with Malachi's spirit, now more tangible and terrifying than ever. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his form flickered in and out of visibility, like a dark shadow fighting to solidify. "Foolish girl," Malachi hissed, his voice echoing unnaturally. "You thought you could bind me? You are but a pawn in my game." Karen stumbled backward, her mind racing. "What do you want from me?" "Your blood," Malachi snarled. "Your soul. Release me, and I may spare you." Karen's survival instinct kicked in. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing a sharp knife for protection, though she knew it would do little against a spirit. Malachi followed, his form gliding through the air effortlessly. She reached for her phone, dialing Dr. Rains with trembling fingers. The call went to voicemail. "Dr. Rains, it's Karen. Malachi is loose. The board." Her message was cut off as the phone was yanked from her hand by an unseen force and smashed against the wall. Malachi advanced, his presence overwhelming. Karen's thoughts flashed to the vial of her blood they had used in the previous ritual. She needed to find a way to use it again, to turn his power against him. In a desperate move, Karen bolted to her study, where she kept her research on the occult and the notes from Dr. Rains. Malachi's form grew more distinct, his anger palpable. "You cannot escape me," he roared, the walls vibrating with his rage. Karen rifled through her desk, finding the vial of her blood and the protective charms she had stashed away. Her hands shook as she drew a protective circle on the floor with a sword and placed the charms around it. She stepped inside, clutching the vial tightly. Malachi appeared at the doorway, his form solidifying. "This will not save you," he sneered. Karen took a deep breath, holding the vial up. "By my blood, I bind you, Malachi. By my will, I command you to be sealed once more." Malachi lunged at her, but the protective circle flared to life, a barrier that halted his advance. He howled in fury, the sound almost deafening. Karen began to chant the binding spell, her voice growing stronger with each word. The room shook violently as Malachi thrashed against the barrier, his form flickering. The energy around them crackled and the air grew cold. Karen's focus sharpened, her fear giving way to determination. By the power of my blood, by the strength of my spirit, I command you, Malachi, to be bound. She poured the vial of blood onto the floor within the circle, the liquid glowing with a supernatural light. The glow intensified, enveloping Malachi's form. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the light pulled him toward the center of the circle. "No!" Malachi bellowed, his form being torn apart by the force of the spell. "You cannot do this!" Karen continued the chant, her voice unwavering. The glow grew blindingly bright, and with a final ear-splitting scream, Malachi was sucked back into the Ouija board, which appeared in the center of the circle, now cracked and smoking. The room fell silent, the oppressive energy lifting. Karen collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. She stared at the damaged Ouija board, her breathing ragged. It was over. For now. As she lay on the floor, trying to catch her breath, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Rains. "On my way. Stay strong." Karen managed a weak smile. She had faced Malachi and survived, but she knew deep down that this battle had left scars, and the shadows of the past would always linger, a reminder of the darkness she had encountered. The days following the climactic encounter with Malachi were a whirlwind of recovery and reflection for Karen. Dr. Rains arrived shortly after her ordeal, finding her exhausted but resolute. He inspected the cracked Ouija board with a mixture of relief and concern. "You did well, Karen," Dr. Rains said, his voice gentle but serious. "But this board is still dangerous. We need to destroy it completely." Karen nodded, her eyes lingering on the fractured board. "How do we do that?" "There's a ritual to neutralize its power and render it harmless," Dr. Rains explained. "We must act quickly before any residual energy can escape." They gathered the necessary items: purified water, a ceremonial dagger, and a sacred fire pit located at the edge of town, where many ancient rituals had been performed for centuries. Karen felt a strange sense of déjà vu as they prepared for the final step in containing Malachi's malevolent spirit. The night was dark and clear as they arrived at the fire pit, a circle of stones surrounding a deep, charred basin. The air was crisp, and the sounds of the forest around them seemed to hold their breath, as if nature itself was aware of the importance of this moment. Dr. Rains set the Ouija board in the center of the pit and began chanting in an ancient language. Karen watched as he drew symbols in the air with the ceremonial dagger, the blade glinting in the firelight. She poured the purified water over the board, the liquid sizzling as it made contact with the bone-like surface. "The sacred flames will cleanse the board," Dr. Rains said, lighting a bundle of herbs and tossing it into the pit. The flames roared to life, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. Karen stepped back, her heart pounding. As the flames consumed the board, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The fire crackled and popped, the symbols on the board glowing briefly before disintegrating into ash. "By these flames, we purify this vessel," Dr. Rains intoned. "By our will, we banish the darkness within." The fire blazed higher, and a sudden gust of wind swirled around them. Karen could almost hear Malachi's anguished scream carried on the wind, a final desperate cry as his essence was eradicated. The flames gradually died down, leaving nothing but a pile of smoldering ashes. "It's done," Dr. Rains said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Malachi is gone for good." Karen let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension drain from her body. Thank you, Dr. Rains. I don't think I could have done this without you. He smiled kindly. You showed great courage, Karen. Many would have faltered, but you faced the darkness head on. As they made their way back to the car, Karen felt lighter than she had in weeks. The oppressive weight of Malachi's presence was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and clarity. She knew she still had a long road to recovery, but the worst was behind her. Over the next few weeks, Karen worked to rebuild her life. She cleaned and reorganized her apartment, reclaiming her space from the remnants of the haunting. She also took up meditation and began seeing a therapist to help process the trauma she had endured. Lily visited often, offering support and companionship. The bond between them had grown stronger through their shared ordeal. One evening, they sat on Karen's balcony, sipping tea and watching the sunset. I'm proud of you, Karen, Lily said, breaking the comfortable silence. You faced something terrifying and came out stronger. Karen smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. I couldn't have done it without you, Lily. You were there for me when I needed you most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Karen felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid. The darkness had been vanquished, and she was ready to embrace the light. One day, Karen received a package from Dr. Rains. Inside was a small, intricately carved box with a note. For your protection. Should you ever need assistance again, you know where to find me. Karen opened the box to find a collection of protective charms and a book on advanced demonology. She smiled, feeling a sense of closure. She placed the box on her shelf, a reminder of the strength she had discovered within herself. As she stood in her living room, looking around at the life she had reclaimed, Karen knew she was not alone. She had her friends, her newfound knowledge, and the confidence that she could face whatever came her way. And with that, she turned the page on this dark chapter of her life, ready to move forward with courage and hope. Months had passed since Karen had faced Malachi and emerged victorious. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and she was beginning to believe that the nightmare was truly behind her. She had resumed her daily routines, found comfort in the support of her friends, and even started dating again. One evening, after a pleasant dinner date, Karen returned home to find a small package on her doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Puzzled, she carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. She carefully unwrapped the package, revealing an old leather-bound book. There was a note tucked inside the cover. Thought this might interest you. A friend. Curiosity piqued. Karen flipped through the book. It was filled with ancient rituals and spells, written in a language she didn't recognize. As she examined it, a particular page caught her eye. It depicted a binding ritual strikingly similar to the one she had performed with Dr. Rains, but with one significant difference: a final step that had been omitted from their ritual. Her heart began to race as she read the translation at the bottom of the page. To fully seal the malevolent spirit, the vessel must be destroyed at the place of origin. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Could it be possible that their ritual had been incomplete? She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Rains, her voice urgent. Dr. Rains, I found something. A book that suggests we missed a crucial step in binding Malachi. There was a long pause before Dr. Rains responded, his voice grave. Karen, where did you get this book? It was left on my doorstep, she replied, her mind racing. There's no return address, just a note saying it was from a friend. Dr. Rains sighed. I need to see this book. Come to my office immediately. Karen quickly gathered the book and drove to Dr. Rains's office. He examined the book with a furrowed brow, nodding slowly as he read the passage. It seems our initial ritual was indeed incomplete, he said finally. The true binding must be completed at the site where the board was first created. Where is that? Karen asked, dread gnawing at her. Dr. Rains hesitated before replying. The board was crafted in an old abandoned church on the outskirts of the town. It's a place of dark history where many such artifacts were created. Determined to put an end to Malachi's influence once and for all, Karen and Dr. Rains prepared for the final ritual. They gathered the necessary items, including the protective charms from the package and the remnants of the Ouija board, now carefully collected from the fire pit. As they drove to the abandoned church, the sky grew darker, the air thick with an ominous energy. The church stood like a sentinel of forgotten horrors, its dilapidated structure casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Broken pews and shattered stained glass windows littered the floor. At the altar, they set up the ritual circle, placing the Ouija board fragments in the center. Dr. Rains began the chant, the ancient words echoing through the empty hall. Karen joined in, her voice strong and determined. As they chanted, the air grew colder, and the shadows around them seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Suddenly, a fierce wind whipped through the church, extinguishing their candles. In the darkness, Karen felt a familiar, chilling presence. Malachi's spirit manifested, more furious and powerful than before. You think you can defeat me? Malachi roared, his form towering above them. You are nothing but pawns in a game you cannot comprehend. Karen's resolve hardened. She held up the protective charms, their faint glow cutting through the darkness. We will finish this, Malachi. Your reign of terror ends tonight. Dr. Rains continued the chant, his voice unwavering. The charms in Karen's hands began to pulse with energy, their light growing brighter. Malachi screamed, a sound of pure rage and agony as the light enveloped him. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the fragments of the Ouija board glowed with an intense heat. The church seemed to come alive with a dark energy, the walls vibrating with Malachi's fury. By the power of this sacred place, by the light of our will, we command you, Malachi, to be bound forever, Karen shouted, pouring every ounce of her strength into the words. A blinding flash of light erupted from the circle, and Malachi's form was sucked into the board fragments. The ground shook one last time before falling silent. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. It's done, Dr. Rains said, his voice filled with relief. As they gathered the remnants of their ritual, Karen noticed something odd. One of the protective charms had a small inscription on it that she hadn't seen before. She held it up to the light, her eyes widening as she read the words, "Property of Malachi." Her blood ran cold. She looked at Dr. Rains, who was staring at the charm with a mixture of horror and realization. "Karen," he said slowly, "we've been tricked. This charm was his all along." Before they could react, the ground beneath them split open, and a dark, malevolent energy surged forth. Malachi's laughter echoed through the church as his spirit, now freed and more powerful than ever, rose from the depths. "You cannot bind me," Malachi sneered, form solidifying. You have only made me stronger. Karen and Dr. Rains backed away, their hearts pounding with fear. The final twist of Malachi's game had been revealed, and they were trapped in the very place where his power was strongest. As the darkness closed in, Karen realized the true extent of Malachi's cunning. The battle was far from over, and the real fight for soul was just beginning.
And that's a wrap on today's chilling tale. If you enjoyed the story and want more spine-tingling content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a frightful update. Thanks for watching, and stay spooky.